Hi everyone, and welcome to the first session of OpsMill and Cut. So just before we start, a little bit about what we're going to try to do here. So it's the first experiment. The goal will be to do like more live session of actually looking at code and example, and exploring some of the features that we have in Infrahub, and the overall ecosystem doesn't have to be Infrahub. So today, the idea was actually to start with the SDK, because we feel like there's a lot of features that are in the SDK that we notice that users, customers aren't necessarily familiar with. So the goal is hopefully we can do a very, very quick intro of the SDK, how it works, and then quickly actually starts to go into more advanced features and unknown features. The goal is to make it very interactive. So I have a few people from the team here. Love to get questions from the audience if there's specific things you would like to see in depth or have follow-ups or all of that. Please go for it. That's really the main difference. Also, is a webinar, so hopefully we can have a lot of more interactions, higher level of interactions, and hopefully based on what to explore. I'm not sure if we'll have time to cover everything. Next sessions we'll try to continue these explorations and go in other topic. So with that, let's get started. So I'm gonna share my screen, and so for the for I think most of the demo, we're actually going to use the public instance of Infrahub. So let me start with that. Usually when we export the SDK, it's probably the easiest because it's always available. There's always a login. So here we have a Windows. If you go to demo.infrahub.app, we see that here we already have, for example, some nodes. We have some devices, locations. There's already a schema. Again, we're not going to go into all the details of Infrahub, but that's what we're going to have here. Guys, I don't know who's typing. There is a slight sound of keyboards typing here on the stream. Perfect. So I hope it's big enough. So here I have a completely empty directory. So just again, very quickly, to install the SDK, and we have the doc. I think that would be a good exercise to actually review some of the doc, make sure they're actually working. It's maintaining the doc and having the doc working is not always easy, but that would be a good exercise maybe Damien, to go also through that together.
We currently just don't see your screen share.
Oh, that's good to know. Let me fix that. Is that working now? No, I think Jennifer, maybe. I think you need to switch. Yes, thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much. Cool. So I imagine then you didn't. So when I was showing Infrahub demo.app, so that's the first one. We're still trying to. So here's the instance we're going to use, demo infrahub.app. We have a lot of data in there. It's completely available. It's always there. We reset it every night. So feel free to use that. Now we're also going to use the documentation here. So doc.infrahub.app, saying if we go to the SDK, we also have some of those examples. So in terms of how we install here, I'm going to use UV. So I already have UV installed on my laptop. So I'm just going to do UV add Infrahub SDK. And then, so out of the box, I think what's important is when you install the SDK, you like to install the very, very minimal option. Oh, this already has one. So let's check that. There's nothing here. Oh, sorry, UV init. That's when I did first. So that it actually creates the project and create the pipe project.toml. And then we can install the SDK. So out of the box, when you install the SDK, we try to keep it as small as possible. And for example, when you do that, there's not the CLI option that lets you execute some command, load schema and all that. the reasoning behind it is that, sometimes you just want to have the pure SDK and you don't want necessarily to have the CLI option. So here it's actually telling me like, hey, if you want to use the SDK with the CLI options, you need to install extra packages. So usually the recommendation is always install the SDK with extra packages. And we see here that it actually brings a few more things. So now that we have the SDK installed, let's try to do a first example of how we're actually using that. So let's say, I hope it's big enough. Let's use actually this main example that was created by UV. So the way the SDK work is, if we call Infrahub SDK, we import the client. So we'll talk a minute about it, but let's say we use, for example, the sync client. And the way to use that then would be just to say client. We instantiate the SDK. And then once we have that, we'll be able to say, I want, for example, to get, there's multiple methods to query the object, but let's say that I want to query all, and then we need to provide the information about which objects we want to, and I see that cursor is going crazy here. So here, for example, if I want to query all the tags, again, we're starting very simple. The way it would work is to say instantiate the client, and then I need to define the kind. So the kind, to go back, like that's something we'll find actually in the instance. If we go in the schema of the instance and we explore the schema and we go for tag, we see here that the kind is actually based on the namespace and the name of the object. So it's built-in tag. It's also something we see here, and it's something that is used everywhere. So that's how we define the tag. And so, for example, here, if I'm just going to print the tag, that should work out of the box, like there's no authentication that is required. So that should just work. And here it's showing me that there is no tag that actually been queried, which that is actually surprising. Do we have no tag on this instance? We do have some tag here, so that's interesting. Let's try to understand what I missed here. Anyone, any thoughts here? I guess that's the fun part of it.
You have to provide the address when you instantiate the client.
Yes, of course. Actually, that's a very, very thank you, Wim. So
by the way, Damien, sorry to disturb you, but when you type in the terminal, the command is not really visible what you are typing. So it would be good if you could move your terminal a little bit to the right or above. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
That works? Cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's why we need to have multiple people on those sessions. So actually, there's a command in the SDK, it's the Infrahub CTL, that helps to identify which instance we're talking to. And so here we see that it's actually trying to connect to localhost, and that's why it's not working. I'm actually surprised it's even responding here. So it's probably an instance I have running on my laptop that I need to, I'm going to shut it down. That will avoid any more mistake of these sorts. Perfect. So now you say, okay, unable to connect. There's no Infrahub SDK. There's no localhost. So the way to go about it is actually to just export environment variable. Let's say Infrahub address, and we define the address of the demo instance. And now I should be able to, if I connect info, it will actually tell me that. It's actually surprising when it does that. Tell me that it's connected, and now I should be able to get so I see there's 3 tags in this instance. Okay, so we have the basics working. Cool.
It'll probably be because of environmental variable or the .infrahub.yaml file pointing to a different instance.
Okay, I'm not sure that I got this one.
Oh no, the address looks correct. Sorry.
We'll get back to that. That's fine. If it's a bug, we'll open an issue. We'll fix it. Maybe it's because I don't have the username and password. I think that might be it. Like if I actually have the username auto and the export Infrahub. Yeah, I guess it's working better. So maybe there's something to double check when we don't have the credentials. Cool. So now that we have, I think, set up at least the very, very minimum, I actually prepare a very small list of all the topics we could talk about. And yeah, so I'll put that here. So I feel like we covered the, installation, covered, I guess, how to run the environment variable. We don't have to cover all of it in this session. It was more like just trying to make sure I don't run out of ideas and all of that in this session. So I just put down all of the things. Maybe the first things we could, that's actually interesting to cover is here. I'm using a plain script, and I could, for example, work with a different branch if I wanted to. Like if I wanted to work on a different branch, I'll have to provide, in Infrahub, everything is based on the branch. So I'll just have to check, for example, what's the name of another branch. Let's say branch 2. And then I could do that here, but I will have to always change that. So one thing we have in Infrahub is there's actually an option in the SDK to automatically run up. Here we go. To automatically run a script. So let's say that I'll just create a copy. I'll call that script 01. And the idea is that I can actually define a function called run. And I always forget the exact syntax of this one. So I'm going to check my cheat code here. And examples that I have not too far. Here we go. So what we need to define in run is we need to pass the client, we need to pass a logger, and we need to pass the name of the branch. So we just need to change slightly the up in the import. And so here, I guess we're going to have to talk about that now. Instead of using the sync SDK, we're going to use the async one in this specific case. So that will look like that. And then now we don't have the need for this anymore. So that's actually a simpler way to run the script. The benefit of that is, so first, let's check how we can actually run that. So here, for example, we do Infrahub run, and then I can say script 01, and I should pretty much get the exact same result. So I see that I'm still creating my different tag. Now, the benefit of using this specific query is that we can actually control. There's a few things that are built into this CLI. Especially, we can actually automatically pass the branch, and the client that actually here I'm making a mistake. I should not initialize the client anymore. Like the clients will be automatically passed to the function for me. And the main benefit is that in that case, there's some options that will be automatically initialized, like the name of the branch. So for example, if I wanted to do that here, I could say, okay, now I want to connect with branch 2. And so going back here, let's just, I guess, make a change to that branch. So if I had a new tag, that would be easier to detect that. So let's say that I had a black tag in this branch 2. So you see here it's part of branch 2, but it's not part of main. So that would be an easy way to see that. Then if I run the script, now I should get 4 tags. And so hopefully we see that. So it's a way to like notice that as we were working with the branch and all that, there was actually a lot of parameters sometimes we wanted to provide to the script. So this CLI is, it's totally not mandatory, but it's a way to simplify that. And we'll see also it has way that you can control automatically the number of concurrent sessions. So we'll talk about that a little bit. That's another things that Infrahub is able to do. So before we go there, I think it's maybe time to talk about sync and async. Don't want to have a full session on that. The goal is not to make it a session on that, but I think a lot of people are kind of not necessarily comfortable with async. So instead of having users to pick, what we decided is we're supporting both. So that's why we have Infrahub client and Infrahub client sync. They're actually 100% the same. I think we're making a lot of efforts to make sure that we even have tests internally to make sure that every time there's a sync method, it has the equivalent async and they have exactly the same inputs and all of that. So I might be, maybe there's one or two exceptions here and there, but I think at 99% we're making a lot of efforts to make sure that we use sync and async. We use a lot of when we actually build things that run on top of Infrahub, our recommendation, and I think it's a requirement, is to use async, because the way we want async will really help us when we have multiple tasks that run at the same time, and as a way to optimize like the parallel executions. We'll talk about it. But technically, for writing your own script, you can use the sync as well. There's no issue. So here in this example, because the run CLI actually requires the async, I'm going to use that, but it really doesn't make a big difference. The main difference is we just need to add a wait in front of all the call that we want to make that actually are using async. Cool. So let's look at the list again. If there's any questions on that, if anyone wants to dive deeper into this topic, please ping me. So we talked about running the scripts. Let's talk about how do we actually create objects and work with all that. So let's say that now we want, in this specific script, we want to start creating additional tags. So if I want to, wow, interesting. So cursor, I think, is reading my mind here. So here we're going to create a new tag. So the way it works is we need to pass the kind, the name of the tag as an attribute. So there's this create function that exists directly on top of the client's method. And then we'll be able to pass the parameters that are specific to this object. So in this case here, let's make it, is it still easy to read or is it too small here?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, awesome. So let's say here that we're going to create a new tag and, perfect. So here, create will actually create the object, but when we just do that, nothing is actually happening. Like creating the object doesn't technically create the object in Infrahub, it just creates the object in memory. And we'll talk about that in a second, sometime becoming very annoying. So what we need to do here is, if we actually want to create the object, we just say we need to save it, for example, and then we'll be able to, for example, print the ID that will gonna get generated. So here, if I run the script again.
Hey, Damien,
yes.
Request from the viewers on this. It seems that there's an overlay on the left-hand side. So if you can move all your windows slightly up and to the right, or make them a little bit smaller.
It should be off now.
We've already solved it.
Okay, because it
better?
just got reported here. No, there was a delay in that coming through. Okay, no, that was a LinkedIn delay. It's already solved. Thanks.
No worries. Better to fix it twice than none. Cool. So what is the issue here? Okay, so here it's actually complaining that I did not await this function, which is a async function. One way to actually see, I don't know if you actually look at cursor, to see if the function needs to be awaited is to look at the signature. If it's a coroutine, it needs to be awaited. So here I'm going to start again. And see here that this object has been created, and I would expect this object to actually have been created in branch 2 because we're still working in branch 2. So perfect. So now it's tag 01 that has been created in branch 2. So now let's say that we want to modify an object, just to go through the basics quickly, and then again we can move forward. So let's see now that we only want to query a tag, and I want to query a tag that is called name01. So here I'm going to have a single one. So in this case, I'm not going to create it. I'm just going to modify it. So I'm going to retrieve the object that already exists. And now I will do a description, and I will call that the updated description. So here I'm querying the object, changing the description. So the way it works for us is we actually need, so because of how Infrahub works, how we have the metadata internally, the way we change the attributes, for example, is we have to reference the attribute directly, and then we have to define value. So that's how I would update the descriptions. And then again, I can save the object. And so if we go for that, see that it should so the proper query, the proper way to actually identify it is either we need to pass the ID or we need to pass name __ value, because again, it's the value of the name that we're searching, and it should do the trick. So it took a little bit longer, and then here, if we go back, we can see that the description has been updated. So now there's actually a third way to do that in Infrahub, which we called upsert, which I think is probably lesser known. So the idea is that if we want to make sure that a specific tag exists in Infrahub with a specific information, but I don't really know if the tag already exists or not. I don't even want to make this additional query because here it's kind of inefficient. Like I have to make the query, and then I have to update something, and then I need to make another query where, when I create the node, I only create a single one. So the options to do that is we actually have the ability to create what we call an upsert. So it looks like when I actually create the object. So upsert description, let's say. And so here what we're saying, so it looks like I'm actually creating a node. And here we just say we allow the upsert. And what's going to work internally is there's actually something that we called internally as the human-friendly identifier. I won't expand on how much discussion we had to come up with that name. But the goal of this HFID, as we call it, it's easier to pronounce, is in the schema, there's actually a way where we can define like how can we identify if this object already exists or not, even before creating it. And so that's what we have here. And we'll look at it in a second, but that's actually what we define is the name here. So because this object has been enabled with the HFID, we're able to use this upsert, and we'll be able to create the object, or in this case, update the object because it already exists, just using the upsert. So here, we see that I did not create a new tag, and it did not complain that the tag already existed, and it just upserted so upsert is the conjunctions of update and insert. It's a term that is actually used in various systems. And that really brings this idea of, now you can actually start writing scripts that are really idempotent, and you don't necessarily to always call and understand what is status of those different objects. And it's super. I mean, I found that super convenient, and I think it really helped make the scripts easier. And yeah, we don't have to consider too much the existing state. We can just define what's the current state. So that's a big features of Infrahub. So any questions or Wim, Alex, anyone on the call? Anything I should add here before moving to the next one? Or
No, I think that looks good. There's no questions on this side.
Cool. So I think what's next is actually talk about the batch. So the batches, which is I think of features we don't really talk about. So let's say now that I want to create multiple tags. Let's say that I want to create 10 of them. And here I'm not going to be super inventive. I'll just go with, let's say that I have a specific ID, and I'm going to use that for all of them to define like what we actually want to do here. So by default, it would look something like that. And so let's just say code that an upsert. I don't really know what is this function here. So we're just going to go with that. So the standard way of doing that is, we're just going to go one by one. That sounds pretty obvious. And in this case, it's just, creating all those IDs. One already existed. It did not necessarily make a difference, but so that's how it works. So now if we actually want to execute those in parallel, that's where it gets, I think, very interesting, is we have the ability to use a batch. And so in Infrahub, actually, it's for someone that knows how to do that, it's not that complicated to leverage async IO if you're running async or all of those other things. But what we wanted is to actually make it, as simple as possible. And we wanted to make it in a way that, if you actually use what provided by Infrahub, we'll be able to provide more, how to say that? We'll be able to control and guide more on how that actually executes, which means that if you execute the script, your logic locally, or if you execute it in Infrahub, we have more way to control, the level of concurrency that we want to apply and all those different things. So the way it works is we actually create a batch. I should really disconnect cursor here. It's going crazy. So what we need first is we need to create the batch. So here, for example, I'm creating the batch. And the benefit of creating it this way, we'll talk about it later, is that we'll apply a global concurrency limit to all of those actions to ensure that we're never going to run too many queries at the same time. We'll come back to that in a minute. So here, let's say now that I'm going to add the function save to the batch. So here, the task is tag.save. And then I just need, so the way the batch work is up. So this is actually a coroutine. If you guys, see anything I'm missing and I'm obviously gonna hit a wall, feel free to jump in. So here it's a coroutine, so it should be a batch. Now I have the batch, I can add the task. So the way it works is we need to patch the task, which is actually the function. So we see here it's previously we had save, and then in between the parentheses we had the arguments. Here we're actually splitting that into two. So because my functions was save, and I just need to pass the upsert here. So if I do that, nothing will technically be, nothing will actually be executed. And so what I need to do here, and I'm going to refer to the documentation on this one because I never get the, I never get that part.
It's the returned node and then the result from
I
execute.
saw that earlier. I'm sure I saw that. Oh, yes, in this one. So that's, here it is. So the way to run the batch is we need to call for, that's the async part is a little like async. Technically, each batch will return two things. It will return the result of the task. And if we're using a node, it will actually return the node object. So here in this case, I'm just excluding that. But that's what we're gonna, and actually here if we say node, name value. That should actually work. So, and now what's gonna, if we execute that, we'll see that automatically the same 10 objects will be non-type as no attribute. So I guess that is not what's happening here. There is a way to see that, right?
In the function pass node into your add. So
yes,
it accepts a task,
thank you.
a node, and an upsert.
Thank you very much. So here, if we pass the node, then we get the node back, and then we can do node. Thank you, Alex. And so here, the expectation is that, out of the box, I think we have a concurrency of 10, which means you actually try to create those 10 objects at the same time in parallel using async.io. And one of the benefits, if we go back to using the CLI, is here we can actually control that. So let's say that I'm actually working on, or let's say if I want to create 1,000 nodes, the risk sometimes when we do that is, if we just use async.io, if we want to create 1,000 nodes, is that actually try to create 1,000 requests at the same time, which would be really bad for the server. So the benefit of making sure we have a way, it's not just about executing concurrently, it's also making sure we can rate limit, we can control the number of concurrent requests and so on. So here, for example, if I say I only want 2 concurrent requests, then we'll see that the execution is actually much slower, and we see that the exact same code was now executed with a much slower pace. That's also why we think it's very helpful to it's kind of make the code easier to read. It's less code that you have to maintain on your own, and then it provide more flexibility for us when we actually run the code in Infrahub to make sure that we can control those kind of things without having to change the code. So yeah, something that can be very handy, those patches, and you can use them for anything. Technically, it's not just about working on an object. Like any function, it is possible to use the batch. It will accept. It's actually very, very generic. I was wondering the other day if we should not even take that as a dedicated library. Maybe there's already one that exists we should look at, but that's kind of the goal. So let's go back to the list and see what we have in there. So we talk about that. I guess we talked about that. We talked about that. Any preference here on where to go next?
I think store's a good one. Next.
Perfect. Yeah, that's actually, maybe we can do the more complex node and the relationship and talk about the store then.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Perfect. So for that, let's go back and actually maybe we can create a new script just to not lose everything and start kind of fresh. So here we're gonna start from scratch, and we're actually gonna query, let's say, devices. So let's say that I want to query device of kind infra device. I believe that's the name that we use here. And in this case, I'm gonna double check, but if we say that you want devices that are part of a specific site, so let's say ATL1, we can define here in the filter same site name value equal ATL1. That should give us a bunch of devices. So let's try that. Filters. Here we go. So let's just validate that we'll go back to the main branch for no specific reason. So here we're actually getting all the devices that are part of Atlanta. So I guess maybe that's fine. We'll just do that. So first, maybe before we go there, what could be interesting is sometimes you actually want to understand better like what Infrahub is actually querying, or like what the SDK is actually querying. So there's a CLI, an option in the CLI that is very handy, which is a GraphQL query. I think that's the one. Yes. So if you actually set that up, it's completely for troubleshooting. That's something I would recommend. But what's interesting is here it will actually show us exactly the query that it is executing. And I think it's part of sometimes the magic that the SDK is doing is like in the background, it automatically generates the GraphQL API. Like we're always 99% of the case always using the GraphQL API. And so what we see here is that when I make this query with the SDK, you automatically generate that, and it automatically adds the filter. By default, there's a specific limit. So if it actually returns that there's more than 50 objects, it will automatically manage the pagination for me, for example, unless I want to do that. And we see here that it's automatically query all the attributes of the nodes, but you also query some of the informations that are available for the related object. For example, here in terms of related object, we have a site on this object, we have a platform, we have a tag. But what's interesting here is that by default, it doesn't query everything. It only queries the ID, the HFID, and the display label, so that we can actually identify which node it is, but not necessarily more than that. So where does that take us, and why it's important to kind of understand that when you actually work with Infrahub? So let's say that I want to actually access those information. And here, let's say that I want to go to one device. And one of the device, I will be able to, I'm just going to go into a terminal here to explore. So here, if I go to device site, I see that so here, even though I don't have access to the full objects, I have access to the ID of the site, to the display label of the site, and those information. But you can see here, when I was trying to access the object itself, here it told me like, hey, you actually cannot do that because this object has not been fetched previously. So here there's two options. The first one is I can just say, okay, I'm gonna do a device.site.fetch. And in this case, what it tells the SDK is that in this specific case, it will actually query this additional object, and then I will be able to access it through the SDK. So if I go here and I re-execute my script, so we'll actually see two queries here. We see that he made the first query for the devices, and then he made the second query for the site. And in this case, he only queried one site, which was the one that was returned previously. And so now if I actually go for site peer, now I can actually access my entire object, and I can see that. So now there's another option to do that is because internally inside the SDK, we actually include a store. And the way, so we actually can export that if we go, so it's always available through client.store, and my memory is, it's not the kind of things we actually access every day, but branches, that's the one. So here it's actually organized in branches, but if we see here that because we only create the main branch, so we only have one store for the branch here. And so if we actually access that, so maybe the easiest way to do that is to actually, instead of going into the internals of all of that, is if I say, okay, I want to access the specific device, one of the specific device that I was looking at earlier, which are ATL1 core 1, for example, branch. Up, unable to find this object. What am I missing here?
ID of the object.
I think it should be in there because I queried the devices already.
Populate store equals true.
I think it's by default now, isn't it?
Yep.
I think it is by default. Interesting. I will, but technically it should be there. We'll get back to that in a second. But the idea is that the store will actually automatically store all the objects, and it's actually used in multiple ways. It's used first when we need, like, for example, to access the site here. Another way I could have done that is, so if I actually pre-query the site here, for example, if I say here, I'm gonna query the location site, and I'm gonna query all of them. I believe the populate store is true by default, but let's just to be sure.
Oh, Damien, were you trying to access the store for the site?
No, I was trying to access the store for the device.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. We'll get back to that in a second. So here, what I'm doing is I'm actually querying the site. So what it's going to do is it will actually populate the store with the site. Then I'm querying the devices, and I'm not querying the full site at this time. I'm just querying the the ID of the site this specific device is related to. And here, in this case, I'm not going to add an additional code to fetch. What's going to happen is, if I actually try to access this object now, it will automatically be able, when I request to access the site. Dang. That actually should have, oh. That's the funny part of doing it live. Now we have to troubleshoot that live. So what are we doing wrong here? The expectation is that it would automatically store those objects.
You need to await the first call.
Thank you. Here we go. Thank you. That's the funny part of doing it live. Cool. So here we explore the store as how we use the store internally, and how we can actually use that. Now, another way that we can use the store is sometimes it's actually helpful when we build very large scripts. And we need to create a lot of different objects, and then at some points we need to connect those objects together. Sometimes it's kind of annoying that we have to store those objects or keep track of those objects, because sometimes, so that's actually why we've been creating the HFID in the first place. It's like we want to work in as much as possible in the declarative way. We don't necessarily want to having to remember all those IDs, or which is the state, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes there's a specific object that just doesn't make sense to have an HFID, and the only way you can actually manage this object is just to manage it through its ID. So in this case, it's also a way that you will be able to use the store directly, where you would be able, for example, to access. So let's say, I don't know, I want to create a new interface on one of my devices. So I want to create a layer 2 interface. So in infra interface L2, let me just check the schema, make sure I'm not interface L2, perfect. So here I need the name, I need the speed, and the layer 2 mode, which is trunk or old. So perfect. So let's say I'm gonna create a new interface named uncut, and the speed is gonna be 1000. The layer 2 mode is gonna be trunk. The only mandatory relationship here is the one to the device. So that's where, so let's say that I created the device somewhere else in the specific case. So let's say that I didn't even query them here. If I actually wanted to access a specific device, I could say client.store.gets, and then I'll say the key that I want to access is ATL1 core 1, for example. And so here it will automatically find that object that was previously populated into the store, and I will be able to, we can also provide the kind, we can provide. So here I'm actually able to access it through this name because the object itself has an HFID that was defined. So we always get back to that. Like it's this way, like if we have the HFID defined in the schema, we still need to look at the schema for that. Then we have a way to identify that. Another way is if I actually didn't want to, and that's going to be a bit weird here, but let's say that I wanted to store the object under a different name, like a name. I could also do that. So like I could say client.store, and then I could create I could set a node, and I could give it whatever name, like I could say, hey, I want to have like a first node. That's just the name I gave it to this object. And now it's something that will actually be available in the store through this very specific name. So it's just a way for us to organize and store all those objects, because when we, like the use case is usually like when we build a new site, when you need to create the device, the interface, the cabling, the IP, like you end up managing a crazy number of objects, and that can be very complicated. So either you store them directly and you give them the name that you want, or if your object have HFID, then you can automatically access them through HFID. And then in this case, I will be able to define here in my interface, and I just say, you know, this is my name, this is the speed, and this is the device, and I'm able to pass that here. Up.
We have a question from the audience, from Thomas Scott, around, can you go over the include parameter in the filters as well?
Oh yeah, thank you, Thomas. That is a good one. So let me just get that working. So here I need an await. Here it's save. That should work. I don't need that. Cursor has been very annoying here, and I don't need that as well. So here, if I run, it will create the sites, create the device. I technically don't even need to create a site. And then it would retrieve one of the device through the store, through its HFID, and then you would actually create the device with that.
I think you'll have to use the get by HFID method on the store.
Thank you.
And And then when you save the interface, you'll have to await it again. Sorry that I have to remind you once more on that.
No, actually, that's perfect. I always need to remind you of that. So now it still doesn't want to find it in the store. That is weird. We'll pass on that, but it's actually not expected that why this is not working. That actually should work, but let's not wait too much time on that. I'll double check, and I guess we'll have to fix something. But the intent is that the store is actually accessible. So back to Thomas' question then. If we go to the filters, so by default, what we're going to include in the filters are all the attributes, and then we're going to include the relationship that have of type either they are cardinality 1 or they're of type. So let's go, for example, to a device. If we go to the schema for a device, we see here that in the first query we'll include all the attributes, and then we'll also include all the relationships that are either of cardinality 1, so it's the number here on the left, so like site, ASN, primary IP, platform, like domain, or all the other relationships that are of kind attributes. So for example, in this case, the tags will also be included and they will also be queried, but all the other relationship of type components or groups or generics, those will not be included at all. Like it means we're not even going to query the ID of those objects, because I know we could have a lot of interface, for example, and sometimes you don't need that, and that would be very that would add a lot of loads to actually do that. So that's why we don't do that. Now, if we actually add the include and exclude, so I can talk about how it works now, but there's actually a PR open. It's been open for a long time, but there's a PR open, and we're planning to change that. The way it works right now is we can define include, and if we include, it means that we include on top of what's already being queried. The way we want to implement it in the future is we actually want to make sure to go to, if we say include, it's going to include only what we request. And why I've been, I guess, stalling on this one is because there's it's definitely a pretty big breaking change. So we need to do more testing on that. But I feel like that would be a much cleaner implementation and easier, because right now it's like we have those default attributes, relationship of type attributes, and of cardinality 1, and then whatever we have include adds on top of it, and whenever we want to exclude adds on top of it as well. So for example, here, if I wanted to remove the ASN, I could just say, hey, I want to exclude the ASN, and then we can just get rid of all of that and look at the query that will be executed. And so here we see that the interface have been added. So now it's always query the interface, and so still only the ID, the HFID and all. And technically the ASN should not be here. So that's the what the include and exclude. And since we're on the filter, I guess the other option is we also have the option to use the prefetch relationship. So what prefetch relationship is, instead of me doing two query earlier, where I would query the site first, and then I would query the other object to actually have access to the full site. If I say prefetch relationship, then every relationship that is being queried, it will also automatically query all the objects that are associated with it at once. So here, for example, I'm going to remove the interface because that would be a really big query. But if we do that, we can see that the query that is being executed now is not just the ID and HFID, for example, of the tags, but you also have the name and the description, Same for the site. Like for the site, we have all the information about the site. So it's pretty much the same as what I was doing earlier, where we had 2 queries for one. So it's something that can be very handy, but at the same time, if you query a large number of objects, it also can lead to some inefficiency, and sometimes that's where some of the optimizations can really come into play, and sometimes use more of the store and actually just query the ID that you need and query the full object separately and let the store reconcile that for you. So it's like all features, it's a sword with 2 edges. Cool. I hope that answers Thomas' question here. There's a few more things. There's also a way we can, I don't remember if it's enabled by default, but out of the box, we can also query in parallel, like it's kind of a hidden batch. Like if you want to query a lot of objects and you need to query hundreds of objects, thousands of objects, then by default, we're actually going to do the pagination like sequentially. But if you have the parallel true, it will automatically batch all the requests for the pagination to speed things up. And you have the ability also to control the size of the batch and all of that. So that's all options that are available. I guess I should check if parallel is. Do you guys know if parallel is enabled by default or not? Or
it's not.
It is not. Okay. Cool. So the last, I guess we covered most of the item on the list.
You have one more question there, Damien. Is it possible to upsert template objects with related components using the store as well?
Is it possible to insert templates? Yes, that should work. The thing is, if the object was already created, if you updated the template, it would not recreate the. Actually, it's a good question. Is it possible to upsert? I think we'll have to double check, but I believe it's possible. Yes. The one thing is the object was already exist, then it will not. And if the template was modified, it will not change the object. It's like the template is used only at the creation of the object. But I believe you can upsert an object based on with the template. Yes. So we talk about the internal store. We talk about some of the query. Talk about include query. I guess we didn't talk about the fragments. We didn't talk about that. Maybe the last one I wanted to cover was the protocol. So I guess if you're like me and you always forget to have add async or await or things like that, your best friend is MyPy that will be able to type check the code and make sure that everything like typy and rough to validate the code even before executing it. And so in Infrahub, because we're always having this dynamic schema out of the box, like the objects are not very type friendly. So for example, here, if I wanted to access the value of a given device, we can see here that everything in white here actually means that the code editor doesn't understand what it is, and it cannot tell me if its object already exists or not, and that's the kind of things that PyPy is going to complain about. So one thing we did we have in Infrahub is we have this command, and we're using what we call Python protocol. So it's kind of intimidating at first, but the way it works here is we have this way where we can generate. So here I'm using Infrahub CTL. I say, okay, go read the schema in Infrahub. And based on my schema that was loaded on my instance of Infrahub, I want you to generate a protocol file. And so here, and I say, I define where is this file going to be located. So here it's in this next to my system. So it's pretty long. But if we go here, we can see, for example, that it has now a definition of what an infra device looks like. And what we can do now is we can actually use those protocol. And if I say from protocol import infra device, instead of defining which kind of device I want to query using a string, I can actually define a protocol. And now what that means is that every object that I'm getting back, instead of getting, like if we go back here, previously we're getting a list of Infrahub nodes, which is the generic object that doesn't have any information about my specific schema. Now I'm actually getting a list of infra device. And we can see here that this part actually turned into blue now. So because this object, we know that it's a device, we know that it has a name, and a name is an attribute, and an attribute has a value. Then I actually use that, and we see that MyPy is actually happy. If I was trying to use, if I fat finger, for example, the name, then in this case, it will still complain. But we see that, for example, the name actually exists. So that's one way we can do that. And so from the code point of view, it looks exactly the same. We actually don't need to change anything. It's just all the type checking and the help that we can get from the IDEs actually will provide a much better value because of that. So yeah, that was my 30-second intro to protocols. I think we're pretty much at time. So unless there's a few more questions, maybe we can stop here. I'm
not seeing any other questions come in.
Awesome. Then, yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Again, bear with us. With me, I guess it's the first one. So if you have any feedback on what we need to change, improve next time, hopefully, as we build, we'll be able to go into more advanced topic. And yeah, if you have specific topics you want to talk about for the next one, we're still trying also to find what's the right cadence for those sessions. But our goal is to yeah, as often as it's useful. So let's put it this way. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for posting the question. Thank you, Jennifer, William, Alex, for the help. And have a great rest of the day.